There were only ever two things I wanted to talk about: gaming and science. Science is my passion because through it I see solutions to so many of the world's problems. And gaming is my escape. It's the thing that lets my autistic brain rest in a world where all of those problems mount up because, let's face it, things are pretty broken. I'm mentioning this now because I want to be completely honest. While I want this video to be hopeful and optimistic, a lot of the topics I'm going to be talking about, they upset me, they enrage me. I watch people play games a lot on YouTube to zone out, to decompress, to be in a little bubble where the world can't touch me for a while. But today, while I am going to be talking about science, I cannot explain any of these scientific concepts without dipping into politics and society. So if you came here for something whimsical and scientific, a cool concept you can talk about, or if you wanted some nostalgia with gaming, some comfy escapism, you probably might want to miss this one. Today I want to talk about an issue that is going to define the coming decades for many countries around the world, and a lot of the elements that have led us up to this point, and that is population collapse. And if you're new to this topic, that might sound a bit absurd, collapse, really? Are we not dealing with an overpopulation problem? And what I'm talking about is, well, sounds like an underpopulation problem. And the answer to that is sort of. Yes and no. It's complicated, but the short version is that both things can be true at once. So let's put this all into context, shall we? Throughout most of human history, population growth was slow and steady, barely changing from century to century. Then around the turn of the 20th century, everything started to change, and for the most part these were good things. We had better medicine, sanitation, industrialization, better food availability. As of 2025, the global population is around 8.3 billion. 100 years ago, in 1925, it was about 2 billion. In just a century, we have quadrupled in size. Now, if you look at any natural population system, you know immediately this is not going to end well. This is not sustainable. Resources are finite. Every species, from bacteria in a petri dish to deers on an island, follow the same pattern. A period of rapid growth, and then a lag phase where everything seems fine before the limit starts to kick in. After that comes the crash, a dramatic fall as the population overshoots what the environment can support. Now, whilst I hesitate to say we're in that lag phase just yet, we are getting dangerously close, and we're already starting to see the long-term consequences of that rapid expansion. If you compare the age distribution of 1925 to 2025, the shift starts to become quite obvious. Far more older people, far fewer younger people. The demographic pyramid that we would expect to see, lots of young people at the bottom, fewer old people as we age up, it's not looking like a pyramid anymore. The ratio of working age adults to retirees has dropped significantly. Once a population ages faster than it replaces itself, the entire system begins to strain. Economies, healthcare, pensions, workforce numbers, everything that modern society relies on starts to crumble. Suffice to say, it's not what a lot of boomers seem to claim about them, that young people just need to stop putting avocado on their toast, that they need to stop going on holidays, they need to stop being selfish. That's actually an argument I hear a lot, that young people just want to live a lavish lifestyle. And I think, who the hell are you talking about? Yes, there's a very small subsection of rich people, there always has been, but the overwhelming majority are not doing that. Most young people today, they're struggling to survive financially. So yes, economics is a huge part of this population collapse, and those issues are only going to get worse. More older people require more support to survive. More elderly require more pensions. That burden inevitably falls on the younger generation. More taxes, higher cost of living, and with the proportion of people working in a country decreasing, not only is less wealth generated overall, but more of the young population must dedicate time and energy in caring for the older people, which once again has a compound effect of less industry being created. All of this makes it harder to plan a family. fewer resources, fewer opportunities, and more uncertainty about the future. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. If economics drives fertility, then why do people in poorer countries have more children? They have less money, so shouldn't they be having fewer kids? And again, it comes into the fact that this is multifactorial, but saying that alone is a very simplified answer of what's going on. The answer is it's not just about money. It's about security, survival, and perhaps more importantly, weighing up your options with the cards you're dealt. In many countries without pensions or reliable social support, children form a type of insurance for old age. They are expected to care for their parents when work is no longer possible. High child mortality also plays a role. Families have more children because they expect some of them might not make it. This explains why fertility rates are higher in poorer countries, but it comes at a terrible cost. These families are trapped in cycles of poverty, stretching limited resources thin and leaving their children with few opportunities for education, health and stability. They don't dream of any better life because they know it's not on the table for them. Compare that to a supposed wealthier country like the UK, where the cost of raising a single child, childcare, housing, education, these costs are astronomical. Having fewer children is often the responsible choice, because bringing more into a system that cannot adequately support them would be reckless. Many people hesitate to have children not out of selfishness, but out of a desire to give them a better life, one without the struggles that they themselves face. Every generation wants their children to have a better start than they did. Yet today, the ladders that once allowed social and economic mobility are being pulled out from under young families. We are the generation that was told to be responsible. So just because we can have children doesn't mean it is responsible in doing so if it pushes an entire family or even a whole generation into poverty. I know it might sound like I'm being dramatic, but I'm really not. A close friend of mine, after getting their degree and working in the industry that he at the time thought was his dream job, was made redundant. The industry he was working in started to suffer economic uncertainty, so roles were slashed. And then more roles were slashed because of the increase in artificial intelligence. He is now being forced to move back in with his parents after sending hundreds of job applications out with no success. Another friend was made redundant again just in the last year. A third couldn't even find work in the field that they had studied for, and so he works for minimum wage, and he is depressed out of his mind. I have to constantly check up on him because I'm terrified he's going to hurt himself. He worked part-time all through his degree, earning minimum wage, only to have the exact same wage when he finished, but now with a mountain of debt over him. I myself had a specialized role in a COVID-19 laboratory. As soon as the pandemic was over, I, along with hundreds of others, was made redundant. Even a master's degree guarantees nothing in this day and age. It used to be that you work for a company for life, but now those companies see their workers as little more than disposable assets. Economic uncertainty. That is the story of our generation. We grew up being told it was selfish and irresponsible to have children if we couldn't afford them. But now suddenly it's selfish and irresponsible not to have kids. And have you noticed who's yelling this the loudest? The people sitting comfortably at the top, those with the savings, the safety nets, the trust funds, the ones who can not only afford to have as many children as they want, but who also happen to benefit from there being an endless supply of underpaid workers at the bottom. The decision to have fewer children is often not laziness or a lifestyle choice, it's a rational response to systemic pressures. So what do governments do when they grow concerned about the low fertility rate? Well, one of the tools they often turn to is immigration, bringing in people from other countries to fill jobs, pay taxes, support pensions. On paper, it's a straightforward demographic solution. More working age people, more economic activity, more support for an aging population. But when labour becomes abundant and cheap, companies no longer need to show loyalty to their employees. Jobs become more precarious, wages stagnate, and security vanishes. Immigration can be a temporary boost to the workforce, but it also reinforces the cycle of disposable labour, deepening the very economic pressures that make young people delay or forego having children. This is not a silver bullet. In fact, as if to add salt to the wound, the short-term fix only exacerbates long-term consequences. Immigration does not solve the problems caused by an aging population. It's a temporary boost at best and not a very good one. Immigrants also age, and over 1 or 2 generations, their fertility patterns converge with the local population. Immigration alone cannot sustain population levels or replace declining fertility. If anything, it's only compounding the problem. Future generations will have even more elderly to care for in an even more stretched financial situation than we face today. We're just pushing the problem down the river until one day we hit breaking point. This is the reality of what demographers call the silver tsunami, and it's a structural challenge that we need to confront if we want a sustainable future. I mean, not just the UK, but so many first world countries. Similar patterns can already be seen in countries like Japan and Italy, where aging populations are creating significant economic and social pressures. Some countries like Sweden and France, they have policy interventions like generous parental support and childcare subsidies and family-friendly work policies. They can mitigate fertility decline slightly, but these solutions alone are not going to reverse demographic trends. Now, don't get me wrong, this is only part of the picture. If anything, an even bigger factor is wealth inequality. For many young people, it often doesn't feel worth fighting for. Nepotism dominates and the game feels rigged from the start. As of 2025, the top 1% of the population controls 43% of the world's wealth. The world has limited resources, and when those resources are hoarded by a select few, of course there isn't enough to go around. And I know what some people will say, that billionaires are actually a good thing. They create jobs, they innovate, they earn their wealth through hard work. And to a small extent, and I mean a very small extent, that is true. Companies provide products, services, and employment, but there's a lot of nuance that is being overlooked, because much of what counts as wealth creation at the top is actually wealth extraction or concentration, rather than generating fundamentally new value for society. A huge proportion of modern wealth accumulation happens through derivatives, leveraged buyouts, where money is moved around rather than new goods or services being produced. Billionaires can see their net worth skyrocket while the economy as a whole grows only modestly. Many of the richest individuals and corporations accumulate wealth not primarily through innovation, but by dominating markets, influencing regulations, or acquiring their competitors. This concentrates resources rather than distributing them efficiently or fairly. At one point, I worked for one of the biggest science companies in the world. Did my income reflect that prestige? Of course it bloody didn't. I was yet another disposable employee, and being an individual with autism, I fell into the same trap that so many others do, practically willingly. This belief that if I went above and beyond, did overtime in many cases for free, and if I kept just showing that I was a hard-working and capable scientist, I would be recognized and allowed to progress. All it meant was that I willingly allowed myself to be exploited. And then let's look at ownership. Wealth can grow simply through ownership of land, intellectual property, financial assets. These generate passive income while creating barriers for others. They profit from scarcity rather than expanding what is actually available to society. So yes, I will concede that billionaires create some wealth. But the majority of extreme wealth growth in the last century has come from concentrating those existing resources. It's come from controlling infrastructure, markets, policy levers. Rather than producing new value and improving life for most people, in a world of finite resources, this concentration in a small fraction of hands reduces access for everyone else, directly impacting young people's ability to build lives, raise families, thrive, and yes, increase that fertility rate. I know that life extension is not going to solve all of the world's problems, not by a long shot, but at least it starts to make a dent in some of them. Extending health spans does not alter population numbers directly, but it changes the ratio of productive, healthy individuals to dependent older ones. And let's not beat around the bush here. I'm not going to pretend that biological immortality isn't the logical endpoint of anti-aging technologies. I don't know how long it will take to reach that point. But even a modest gain of 5 to 10 years of healthy working life could ease some of the structural pressures on society, allowing younger generations to focus on improving living standards rather than simply supporting the elderly. Anti-aging interventions would not eliminate the need for thoughtful population and resource planning. I mean, if anything, they're going to mean we have to plan a lot better. We have to always operate within the limits of finite planetary resources, but from a systems perspective, increasing the duration of healthy, functional life is a variable that can influence demographic and economic sustainability in a way that simply increasing birth rates cannot. We need to reach a point where the global population is stable. Exactly how many humans this planet can sustain, it kind of depends on which model or research you look at. I know the figures can vary, but one thing is clear: the exponential growth we have experienced over the last century is not sustainable. One way or another, population numbers need to plateau. Is what I'm suggesting radical? Of course it is. But it is not controversial to point out that many aspects of the world today are stacked against younger generations. Home ownership is becoming increasingly out of reach. In 1980, the average age of a first-time UK homeowner was 25. Today it is 34, and despite what some of the older generation will say, no, that is not by choice. Young people are burdened with student loan debt that, in many cases, feels impossible to repay. I've lost count of how many friends that have admitted to me, often in tears, that they will be paying off their student loans for the rest of their lives, whilst also expecting to fund their own children's higher education. In fact, the last person that said that to me has never left home, despite now working for 7 years. Honestly, higher education in its current form has become a house of cards. For many it's seen as a scam, and I don't know how the bubble isn't going to burst, and burst soon. As someone finishing up their 3rd degree, in the vain hope that this will secure financial stability, I know firsthand how outdated, archaic and inefficient higher education is. I can learn far more online, and much faster, mind you, but that information, that knowledge, is effectively worthless without the piece of paper employers demand. I mean, is it any surprise that so many are starting to turn to sites like OnlyFans or something else to try and fund themselves? And while critics love to morally grandstand, claiming that these individuals are giving away their dignity, the reality is far more complicated. Many don't see it as some glamorous shortcut, nor as a first choice. They see it as one of the few avenues left that can offer financial stability, or at least a chance at upward mobility, when traditional paths have failed them. And yes, it doesn't work for everyone, it doesn't work for most, but for many the cold calculation is simple. This offers a chance at a lifestyle they have no access to through conventional work, even with degrees, even with years of experience, even while working full time. So people can sit there and judge them all they like, but maybe the scrutiny is aimed in the wrong direction. Instead of shaming those trying to survive, shouldn't we be interrogating the systems that produce the world where selling one's image is a more viable path to security than the very jobs young people were promised would lead to a dignified life? In the mid-20th century, even an average worker could reasonably expect to buy a home. House prices were a manageable proportion of income, and the idea of working hard, saving, and eventually owning property was realistic. Today that picture just doesn't exist. In the UK, the median house price now sits at more than 7 times the average annual salary, and in many cities the ratio is far worse. The cost of entry has exploded. Deposits, mortgage restrictions, high interest rates mean that for most young people, buying a home is impossible without substantial family help or extraordinary luck. And those consequences cascade. Because the barrier to entry is so high, people end up renting for years, sometimes decades, before they can even attempt to get on the ladder. This is that wealth extraction I was talking about. You are not paying towards something you will one day own, you are paying someone else who already owns it. The longer you're stuck renting, the further ownership drifts out of reach. By the time many finally inch close to buying, life has thrown in additional financial pressures, children, rising living costs, career instability, so they're forced into increasingly unfavorable options just to make the numbers work. Look at the United States' newly introduced 50-year mortgage. Yes, it lowers the monthly payment, but over the lifetime of the loan, you end up paying twice the value of the house in interest alone. That is wealth extraction hollowed out into policy. And think about what that really means. If you bought a house at 18, you wouldn't own it until you were 68. That's 2 generations locked into a single purchase. How can anyone look at this and pretend that the system is functioning? And let's look at another issue, the slow disintegration that getting a degree will lead to a stable, well-paid job. In the UK in 2025, young people aged 16 to 24 are facing youth unemployment rate at 15%, with over 700,000 people under 25 unemployed. Even among those who graduate, things are uncertain. Yes, graduates still have better employment outcomes than non-graduates. That's what you see in the papers, right? That's how they try to keep getting you coming in. But the kinds of jobs available aren't what they expected. Increasingly, the graduate premium is an illusion. If you need to earn more just to service the debt that non-graduates never had to take on, then even equal employment outcomes translate to worse financial outcomes. For those whose parents come from affluence and can afford to pay it straight away, I mean, great, but it is an insane amount of money. I don't think anyone can justify how much education has become. But what about those who can't do that have to go into debt, which is the majority? Speaking on the UK specifically, because that's where I'm from, many young people, when they finally do enter a job that pays well enough to start paying back their debt, they find that their debt has already increased, because often it takes years to even reach that point. And even when they do start paying it back, they find that their contributions don't even cover the cost of inflation. Their debt is going up, not down, despite paying into it. So the less affluent are expected to foot a bigger bill than those that can afford it. Please tell me how it makes sense. Please tell me how it makes sense that the poorest are the ones that are paying the most. 25 years ago, it cost £1,000 to go to university for a year. Now it's £9,250. 25 years ago, despite that exceedingly smaller amount, many of them never paid it off. Income has not increased ninefold over the past 25 years. If people struggled to pay it off back then what hope in hell do they have of doing so now? For most young people, the reality is that they will be in debt for the rest of their life. Before they even start full-time employment, they are already in debt. In the past, it was written off after 20 years. That's not the case anymore. Only yesterday I read an article about British people who left the country and are not paying back their debt. And I have little doubt that the thought process started with the fact that wages are higher overseas. So they thought if they worked abroad, maybe they could earn enough to make a dent. Maybe they could envision a future where they are not in debt. And then they quickly discovered that if they simply chose never to pay it back, despite legal threats and fear-mongering that they would have you believe, there is in actuality not much that can be done about it. So they are labelled as benefit scroungers, yet another attempt by the elites of our society to turn our animosity on each other and not the institutions that created the problem in the first place. Why on earth are we blaming individuals rather than the system that created the problem? Rather than calling these people benefit scroungers, why are we not examining the fact that the only way these people believe they can survive is to flee their home? More and more jobs can demand degrees because the labour market has been flooded with them. Jobs that never required a higher education suddenly do, even though the work hasn't changed. It's the barrier to entry people now face just to join the workforce. If society requires skilled labour, then they should invest in those individuals in the knowledge that their contribution will pay back society in dividends. Instead, interest is being used to extract wealth on the back of the broken promise of a better life. And most people in this country are aware that the pension scheme is not going to exist in its current state by the time they reach retirement. The reality of their existence is that they will spend their lives paying for other people only to be left destitute by the end of it anyway. I am a firm believer in the philosophy of hating the game, not the player. One of my friends has never worked, they've lived off of benefits all of their life, and you know what? Out of my friend group, their quality of life is the best. Now there are those that would hate them for that, but it's short-sighted. It's a spurt of anger that solves nothing. I don't begrudge someone for finding a way to survive in a broken system, but what is the natural endpoint of all of this? Not only is there no incentive to work, there is negative incentive to do so. What happens when you create a system in which people realize that working is a fool's game? These people who are on benefits are not lazy or unintelligent, for the most part at least. They see reality for what it is, and they have found the situation that best benefits them. So you can scapegoat them as much as you want, they are not the reason we find ourselves in this situation. In fact, ironically, those people are often the only reason why the fertility rate has not dropped further, because they are the only ones still able to afford to. Let's be realistic about the situation. That debt is never going to be paid back in full because it's physically impossible for graduates to do so in, at this moment, probably 90% of cases. And this article by Martin Lewis perfectly summarizes why I support people pissing off and gaming the system, because let's not be willfully ignorant here, we all know the elites at the top are doing it on an unfathomable level. 83% of UK graduates will never repay their loans according to projections. Well, of course they won't, because they're paying back double or triple what they ever borrowed. So it doesn't matter, because the government is still going to be taking in more than they spent. It's fine that they never repay their loans, because the state gets more money in the long run anyway. And that's what happens when you look at things purely from an economic standpoint. What about the psychological damage you are doing to an entire generation? In fact, let's boil this down to the most basic of principles. Organisms in nature reproduce when there is an abundance of resources. When resources are limited, do you know what happens? They either don't reproduce or eat their own young. After all, the mother can always have another litter, but we are not talking about one winter when food is scarce. We are talking about an entire generation that will spend their lives feeling like they never have enough to make ends meet. Declining fertility rates do not happen in a vacuum. They are the logical endpoint of perpetual resource scarcity. Young people today are faced with crippling student debt, often lifelong. House prices are so expensive that instead of buying a home in your 20s, it's now late 30s, if ever. You do realise that there is a window of time for which women are fertile, right? Because if they wait until they are financially stable, they miss that window. So you have to take the risk of having a child, not knowing if you can afford it. That's how you're going to get more kids. And that 50-year mortgage, especially considering how much later people are buying homes, yeah, you'll have it paid off when you're 90. Young people look at the generations that came before them and see how far the quality of life has declined and expect the same to happen to their children. I mean, the generation after me, they're screwed. You know, what decent human would want to bring a child into this world knowing what they are going to face? And the mad thing is, the world is already overpopulated, so why is France sending letters to 29-year-olds urging them to have children? I mean, Jesus Christ, Macron, yeah, that's really going to solve the issue. Young people just forgot that sex is for reproduction and not just fun. Not for all of the myriad reasons I've mentioned. And why is it that the elites even care about what's going on in people's bedrooms? Is it because they need more young people to look after the elderly? Is it because they want more economic growth and a higher GDP? Is it so they can have more poor workers to exploit? I know this is one of the reasons why many of the people I talk to are so against anti-aging. I mean, the idea of being a wage slave for 250 years so the people at the top can get fatter and richer is a dystopian nightmare. So it might seem paradoxical, but The reason I am so obsessed with anti-aging is, I'll be honest, a dash of naivety and blind optimism. I see a generation that never got a chance to leave the nest and fly. I see a political class dominated by boomers that dismiss the young and working class, and I don't see things getting better in the coming decades. Realistic projections put true anti-aging treatments at least 20 years out, and when I say true anti-aging, I mean actual reversal, not just slowing it down. Those who benefit from it are the ones who have had to live through all of this. We can't change the past, but if we can give people back their youth, maybe we can have a do-over. And it's my hope that they will remember what things were like. You won't be learning from peers, but remembering from your past, taking to heart the mistakes that got the world into the mess it is today, and making sure that never happens again. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and it does so because our collective memories are short. We have to remember the mistakes from the generation above us when we never lived them. I want history to stop rhyming. I want a new story to be written. Anyways, I know I got quite heated there. Dear God, how do people make documentaries like this and not just get angry? It's definitely a skill I need to work on, but let's bring this back to being a tiny bit more analytical. One of the major drivers of this shift is automation and the rapid rise of AI. As artificial intelligence becomes more capable, employers no longer need large numbers of staff to handle routine or entry-level work, the very roles that once gave young people a foothold in the workplace. Entire industries have undergone a quiet, brutal transformation. Unless you were already established before this technological pivot, you've got no chance. And the longer this continues, the worse the gap becomes. Time doesn't make young workers more competitive, it makes them less attractive to employers who increasingly expect experience they never had the chance to gain. People are not failing to keep up, they're being structurally locked out. They get left behind not because they are unwilling, but because the ladder has been pulled up as the tools meant to help us are repurposed as tools to replace us. Now, I came across this meme that encapsulated the absurdity of it all. All our ancient Greek ancestors looking at us having all these complex machines that can do the work of thousands of men, but yet we all still have jobs instead of having orgies outside and eating figs. Our society produces more than any civilization in human history, orders of magnitude more, yet the benefits of that productivity are not flowing to the people who actually need them, they're being concentrated upward. And please don't misconstrue me, I believe tools like AI can be used for good. They're a tool like anything else, they can be used for both. They can augment creativity, increase efficiency, and they can reduce human suffering. In fact, one of the topics I want to make a video on is the way AI is transforming drug discovery. Until recently, identifying potential drug candidates relied heavily on trial and error, screening thousands of compounds in the hope that one might bind to a target in the right way. Now AI models can evaluate structural matches between molecules and biological targets in theoretical space, mapping interactions at the atomic level before a single experiment is run. I have no doubt that AI will massively accelerate both biological and technological growth in the coming decades. These are good things. But when companies use these tools as a replacement for investing in people, when they treat automation as a way to cut costs to inflate profits and discard entire cohorts of workers, then we have to start calling it for what it is. This is not a system that prioritizes social well-being or generational stability, and it stopped pretending to be a long time ago. I mean, geez, is it any surprise that depression and anxiety keep rising despite all of the technology that we have? This isn't simply a crisis of brain chemistry. This is a very real and very logical reaction to reality. But yes, let's just keep throwing SSRIs and CBT without ever addressing the root cause of it all. Would solving aging stop all of this? No, not by a long shot, but it at least starts tackling some of the issues. From a population perspective, what we truly need is a plateau, a stable, sustainable level of people. Personally, I would rather see a world where fewer children are born, not because people don't want families, but because society no longer depends on a constant influx of new workers to replace the old. No more feeding fresh meat into the grinder just to keep an economic machine turning. Think about how often you hear politicians argue that minimum wage can't be raised because it would ruin the economy or cause inflation, yet almost everyone recognizes that minimum wage has stopped being a livable wage in most of the world. If an economy collapses the moment workers are paid enough to live with dignity, then did that economy ever truly function, or was it simply propped up by the quiet exploitation of labor? Automation and AI forces us to confront this. If machines can do the routine work economies relied on for cheap human labor, then the whole justification for underpaying people collapses, and once the system stops relying on a constantly replenished underclass of exhausted workers, society can finally have an honest conversation about population, sustainability, and what a humane economic model actually looks like. Right now in the UK, about a third of all children are born into poverty. How can anyone reasonably expect people to have more children when they already know the kind of life they're going to face? Poverty perpetuates itself across generations, making it even harder for those children to achieve financial stability in adulthood. We need to slow down so that each child can receive the support they deserve, rather than being thrust into a world that is increasingly broken. So let's bring this all full circle, shall we? Bring it back to anti-aging, because this is the point where it becomes not just a scientific curiosity, but a potential structural solution. But before we go any further, there is something I need to say that I consider ethically non-negotiable. Life extension must never be forced on anyone. If someone does not want more years of life, that choice should be respected absolutely. Anti-aging is not about trapping people in more life than they want, especially if it is just to be exploited for labor. It's meant to be about removing the involuntary decay of the body, so people can choose how long they want to remain. But for those who do want to continued contribution must be part of the picture. We cannot sustain a world in which people routinely live to 120 while collecting pensions for half a century. That model barely works now at the life expectancy of 80. Anti-aging cannot simply get extra decades onto the current system. It requires rethinking the system itself. Longer health span means longer work span, not in the exploitative sense, but in the sense of being healthy, capable, creative, and useful for much longer. And this is where my optimism lies. If we slow up biological aging, if we reduce the frailty, the disease burden, and dependency that traditionally accompanies old age, then the demographic crisis stops being a crisis at all. Because a 75-year-old with the physiology and energy of a 45-year-old is not a financial burden. They're not a passive recipient of care, they're a full participant. They're working, they're creating, collaborating, mentoring. They're contributing wisdom without being sidelined by biology. In that world, longer lives don't strain the system, they strengthen it. Anti-aging doesn't just prevent demographic collapse, it transforms it into demographic resilience. And the benefits go far beyond economics. They're psychological, they're, dare I say, spiritual. Right now, there is a growing chasm between generations. Many older people genuinely cannot understand what younger generations are facing because their own youth existed in a completely different economic reality. And I know I've made a few jabs and boomer comments, but I want to emphasize that I am not attacking an entire demographic. I'm criticizing the select individuals with those stereotypical boomer mindsets. Many boomers are based, you know. But younger generations feel unheard, dismissed, or blamed for circumstances they did not create. And I'm not saying that boomers as a whole created it. Longer, healthier lives could shrink this divide in a very real, very human way. We don't just connect with people based on ideas, we connect based on perceived similarity. People naturally relate more easily to others who look closer to their own age. And this affects how seriously we take someone, how we interpret their intentions, and how willing we are to empathize with their struggles. Some might call it vanity, and again, I'm not denying that that is a part of it. But if we ever get to the point that you cannot tell the difference between generations based on looks alone, we become closer as a collective. Right now, the generational divide is amplified by biology itself. Older people often look and feel decades older than the young, frail, anxious about decline, dealing with chronic illness. Young people, on the other hand, are fighting for survival in an economic landscape that simply did not exist when previous generations were their age. They are fundamentally different lived realities, and they make mutual understanding extraordinarily difficult. I think one of the most overlooked consequences of all of this, and it ties in with that mental health crisis, guys, everything seems to be a crisis now, but yes, the mental health crisis, is the collapse of hope. Not hope in the vague motivational poster sense, but hope as a timeline, a set of milestones, a structure for building a life. For decades, society told us that adulthood followed a predictable arc: education, career, home ownership, family, stability, and then retirement. Yes, each step was challenging, but achievable, and crucially, it fit into an 80-year lifespan. When people are told, yes, everything is harder, everything costs more, every milestone comes later, deal with it, what they are really hearing is, your life will be smaller than your parents' lives. Your timeline is shrinking while the world demands more of you. That is not a foundation on which hope can survive. But if someone is expected to live to 120 or 150, maybe longer, then reaching a major life milestone a decade later is no longer devastating, it's proportional. It doesn't carry the same existential weight. It doesn't feel like the world is slamming a door on your face. We need to stop pretending that we can fix 21st century problems with 20th century solutions. Just have more kids, just work harder, just get a degree, just tighten your belt, pull up your bootstrap. It's delusional. It's gaslighting entire generations. We need to face the uncomfortable truth that we are running a system designed for a world that no longer exists. That system needs to change. Yes, maybe it has fewer children, but it has children who are deeply cared for. Maybe universities fade from the picture, but in its place we create better, more efficient ways of educating ourselves. Maybe it's a future where the young are not crushed, and the old are not abandoned. Anti-aging will not fix everything. Not equality, not exploitation, not political failures. But it gives us breathing room. It gives us the one resource we always run out of. The one resource more valuable than anything else. It gives us time.